It started with a drip. Not a metaphorical one. A literal, painfully rhythmic, soul-eroding drip from my garden hose. The same hose I used to water the hydrangeas my grandmother planted 30 years ago. You'd think a slow leak wouldn't be enough to cause an international incident, but you haven't met Karen yet. Let's rewind. My name's Alex. I'm 32, an energy systems supervisor with a major regional power utility. I don't say that to brag. Okay, maybe a little, but it's relevant. See, I know grids. I know transformers. I know exactly how far I can push before someone loses power, and I know how to do it legally. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After years of busting my ass and saving every cent I could, I finally bought a house on the edge of this charming, aggressively beige, suburban neighborhood. Not exactly a palace, but it had bones. Character. A yard just wild enough to suggest cool eccentric, not immediate code violation. That last part, apparently, was a problem. Enter Karen. No, not just a Karen, the Karen. Short platinum bob, passive-aggressive smile, yoga pants that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, and a clipboard she clutched like it contained the nuclear codes. She ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom. And me? I was the serf who dared to install a hammock between two trees without submitting the sacred Hammock Installation Form 34BA. Our first encounter happened the day after I moved in. Hi there, she chirped, smiling like a crocodile with Botox. I'm Karen. I run our little HOA, just keeping the neighborhood safe and beautiful. Translation, I control everything you see, peasant. She handed me a packet thicker than a college textbook, the HOA rules. It had tabs, color-coded tabs. You'll want to pay special attention to the sections on lawn height, post storage, and decorative rocks. We don't do funky here. I swear she said funky like it was a slur. I smiled, thanked her, and buried the packet under 3 pizza boxes. And that, I thought, was that. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I received a flurry of HOA letters, always printed in Comic Sans, which honestly felt like its own crime. I was cited for leaving my recycling bin out 30 minutes past pickup time, suspicious solar panel placement, and, my personal favorite, excessive wind chime activity. But the water situation was the final straw. One Tuesday morning, I noticed my shower water pressure was weird. Like sputtering air, then nothing weird. I checked the kitchen, same. Backyard spigot? Bone dry. I walked out front, and there she was, Karen, standing triumphantly beside the shutoff valve, holding a bright orange, in compliance tag like she'd just slain a dragon. What the hell are you doing? I asked, trying very hard not to launch her into the ornamental koi pond across the street. She put on that smile again. Oh, don't worry. Just a temporary shutoff. You've been warned multiple times about watering during non-designated hours. This is protocol. Protocol. I stared at her. You can't just. Oh, but I can, she interrupted sing-songy. It's in Section 7B of the bylaws. Page 148. Subparagraph 3. You signed when you moved in. I hadn't, actually. But the utility company had a shared valve set up for a few of the older homes, a leftover from the original developer. And Karen had somehow gotten her grubby claws on the master shutoff key. That's when I realized something. She thought she was playing chess. Honey, I play electrical chess. I didn't fight her. Not right away. I let her bask in her petty little victory. Let her parade around with her smug face and freshly printed violation slips. Because while she was busy swinging her clipboard like a scepter, I was digging. First, I pulled property records. Guess who didn't get her electrical box upgraded during the last citywide modernization program? Karen. She had one of the legacy smart meters, the kind still hooked up to a grid relay I happened to supervise. Then I called a buddy in legal at the power company. Asked a few very hypothetical questions. Hypothetical like, if someone, say, retroactively filed a load recalibration request with supervisory clearance and just so happened to flag a property as violating peak energy regulations, would that cause a grid-triggered safety shutoff? The answer? Oh yes. Beautifully yes. And entirely within protocol. But I wasn't ready to flip the switch yet. First, I needed her to double down. To push just a little further. To make it public. So I watered my garden that night. Loudly, proudly, with extra sprinklers. She showed up the next morning in full battle regalia, visor, clipboard, HOA branded windbreaker, and screamed at me from across the lawn like I'd committed war crimes. "You're in direct violation." I held up my coffee cup and waved. "Good morning to you too, Karen." She stomped back to her house, and within hours had tacked a laminated violation notice to my front door. She'd even highlighted it with glitter gel pen. That was my green light. What happened next? Let's just say the lights went out, for her. You ever seen a person's soul flicker like a faulty LED bulb? Because that's exactly what happened when Karen's electricity died at 6:03 p.m. on the dot, right in the middle of her wine and surveillance Wednesday night ritual. She always sat on her porch at that hour, Merlot in hand, wrapped in a fleece blanket with the HOA crest embroidered on it. There was a whole fleet of wireless cameras pointing in 6 different directions, one of which was permanently locked on my yard, as if my mailbox was planning an uprising. And then click. Total blackout. At first, she did the whole confused head tilt thing. You know, the "am I being pranked" face people make when the universe stops catering to them. She tapped her porch light switch a few times. Nothing. She looked at her wine like maybe it had betrayed her. Then the yelling started. "Steve, the power's out." Steve is her husband, a human cardigan who mostly hides in the garage building birdhouses and silently regretting his life choices. He peeked out with a flashlight and the expression of a man who's been yelled at through at least 2 Home Depot parking lots. "It's not the fuse box, hon," he mumbled, fiddling with his phone. "Whole house is down. Can't even get the garage to open." She stormed outside, phone in hand, dialing someone with the fury of a woman whose Pilates class just got canceled. I watched from my living room window, sipping a beer, resisting the urge to cue up Beethoven's Fifth. It wasn't petty. It was poetry. Now, before anyone gets dramatic. No, I didn't just cut her power. That would have been a violation. What I did was file a grid recalibration request through our internal utility portal. See, her house was flagged, by me, anonymously, as pulling peak load draw during off-regulation hours. It was technically true. She ran a ridiculous amount of gadgets. Landscape lights, heated driveway, koi pond warmer. Yes, that's real. And her beloved HOA command center, which I later learned was just an iMac and 5 monitors showing camera feeds. So when the system ran its routine recalibration scan, poof, her property tripped the relay. Auto shutdown. Safety first protocol. Not only legal, mandatory. And since I was the supervisor for that grid zone, well, let's just say the repair queue wasn't exactly a priority. But Karen thought the world had ended. The next day, she showed up at my door, hair frizzed, foundation cracked, rage barely contained under a layer of retail concealer. "You work for the utility company, don't you?" she snapped, skipping the hello entirely. I sipped my coffee and raised an eyebrow. "I do. And our power went out last night. Isn't that your grid?" "Yup." Her eyes narrowed. "So why the hell haven't we had a technician come by?" "Oh, well," I said, scratching my chin like I was actually thinking. "It was flagged as a non-urgent request. Usually takes 48 to 72 hours unless it's a medical emergency. You didn't file under medical, did you?" "No, but this is..." "Karen," I cut in, holding my mug steady. "I'm sure you understand how important it is to follow protocol. I mean, that's what you said to me when you cut my water, right?" She blinked. Once. Twice. Oh, the math was mateing in her head. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. I leaned in slightly. "I think it's appropriate." She made a noise like a boiling teapot and stormed off down my walkway, tripping over one of my non-regulation garden gnomes on her way out. I'll admit, it was satisfying. But this wasn't over. No, this was just the opening act. Because 2 could play the escalation game, and Karen didn't like losing. Especially not to someone younger, smarter, and fully in control of her access to modern civilization. The next morning, I woke up to find a stack of HOA violation notices duct taped to my front door like a ransom demand. A few highlights. Unauthorized garden structures, the hammock. Unapproved solar fixtures, the LED path lights I installed for safety. Improper bird feeder placement, what? And one bolded in red. Hostile behavior toward HOA authority figures. That one made me laugh out loud. She was grasping, but I didn't rip them down. No, I left them there, trophy style. By noon, I got the first neighbor text. Brad from 2 houses down. Dude, what did you do to Karen? She's stomping around the cul-de-sac muttering about electrical sabotage and deep state gnome activity. Respect. That evening, I was out front adjusting my sprinkler, not to water, mind you, just to rotate it, when Karen came marching over with backup. HOA Karen had brought Diane. Diane was the HOA vice president. Her fashion sense screamed suburban dictator, and she carried an iPad like it doubled as a taser. Clearly, Karen was going for intimidation. Alex, Karen said, her voice syrupy and fake. This is Diane. We're conducting a property audit. Are you now? Diane smiled, tight and professional. We've had some concerns raised about your landscaping and the potential safety risks posed by certain installations. Like the hammock? Karen scowled. It's not to code. Didn't realize we had hammock codes. I said deadpan. Do you have a guy for that? A hammock inspector? Diane blinked. Karen didn't appreciate the sarcasm. We're giving you 48 hours to comply, Karen snapped. With what exactly? She waved at my yard. All of it. That's when I knew I had her. Because this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about ego. She couldn't stand that I'd outmaneuvered her. That her clipboard had met its match. I watched them leave. Then I walked into my garage, closed the door behind me, and began my next move. Because if Karen wanted war, I had blueprints. There's a kind of stillness right before a storm, that electric tension in the air that tells you something big is about to hit. Karen didn't know it yet, but she was standing in the eye of it. And I was the storm, armed with grid data, legal loopholes, and the kind of bureaucratic pettiness usually reserved for DMV counters and mid-level managers named Todd. Her 48-hour ultimatum ticked by with the slow, delicious anticipation of a kettle reaching a boil. And I spent every single second preparing my rebuttal. First, I dusted off my most powerful weapon, the code book. Not the HOA's Comic Sans manifesto. The real one. Municipal zoning laws. Building codes. ADA compliance regulations. I combed through them like a raccoon in a dumpster full of lawsuits. And oh, did I find some shiny treasures. Turns out, Karen's house wasn't quite up to snuff. For starters, the 6 security cameras she installed on street-facing poles, those were on city right-of-way property. Illegal. The koi pond heater? Drawing more amps than her outdated circuit breaker was rated for. Fire hazard. And don't even get me started on the HOA office shed she had constructed in her backyard. No permits, no inspections, just vibes and entitlement. So I made a neat little dossier. Printed photos. Annotated pages. Cross-reference citations. I even used sticky notes. Color-coded, of course. Figured she'd appreciate the effort. And I mailed it. Not to her. To the City Code Enforcement Department. But while that little time bomb was ticking, I needed to keep her distracted. And that's where Operation Reverse Surveillance began. Remember those solar-powered LED lights Karen complained about? I upgraded them. Bright white beams, not enough to blind, but enough to illuminate my yard like a prison yard after lights out. I angled 2 directly at her house. She came over the next morning, red-faced and seething. Alex, your lights are violating neighborhood standards for passive lighting after 9 p.m. I gave her a perfectly neutral stare. Well, I reviewed the bylaws. Page 84, subsection 5. Lighting can exceed 800 lumens per fixture. Mine are 790. I measured. Her mouth opened, closed, reopened. You're intentionally harassing me. I shrugged. You mean like shutting off my water? I was enforcing the rules. I smiled. So am I. And then, as if summoned by the gods of poetic justice, a city inspector pulled up to her curb. Clipboard, ID badge, and an expression that said, I don't have time for this, but someone's about to get fined into next Tuesday. Karen turned to see him and went pale. I stood back and let the scene unfold. Inspector, ma'am, are you the homeowner? Karen, yes, but I don't understand. Inspector, We received a complaint regarding unpermitted electrical modifications and structures in violation of municipal code. I'll need to inspect the rear of the property. The way her face contorted, it was like watching a yoga instructor try to hold a plank for 6 straight minutes while a raccoon chews through her phone charger. This is clearly a misunderstanding. My HOA authority. We're here on behalf of the city, ma'am, he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. I went inside, not because I wasn't enjoying the show, but because I had popcorn that needed microwaving. And besides, I had my next move to prep. See, the outage I'd orchestrated? That was just a one-time protocol enforcement. Very clean, very legal. But there's a difference between a one-time blackout and a persistent energy issue. That's where Karen's house came in. Remember how she never upgraded her box during the modernization push? Well, part of that included surge protection compliance, which meant that her box was still susceptible to minor, let's call them oscillations, in power draw. So I initiated a new project through work, routine energy efficiency audits. And guess whose house got flagged for recurrent non-standard load behavior? That's right. Now, don't worry, I didn't actually alter her service. That would have been illegal. I just let the process run its course. Sent her a letter through the utility company stating her property was under review for non-compliant energy consumption and that she'd need to schedule an on-site audit. She called the hotline, waited 40 minutes, finally reached our call center, and got me. Utility services, this is Alex. How can I help you today? There was silence on the other end. Then, Karen. Small world. This is harassment. Ma'am, I said, in the smoothest customer service voice known to mankind. I assure you this is a routine audit. All flagged properties undergo review to ensure grid stability and energy efficiency. If your home is compliant, there should be nothing to worry about. She hung up. 3 hours later, Steve was on the roof ripping off solar path lights like they were cursed relics. I could have stopped there. But remember, she cut off my water. In Arizona. In the summer. That's a line you don't cross. So I filed a Freedom of Information request with the HOA Management Office. And guess what? Karen had been expensing HOA office upgrades to the communal fund. She billed the association for her personal shed's insulation, for her coffee machine, for a mini fridge labeled Emergency HOA Beverages. And she thought I was the problem. So I brought in backup. My neighbor, Elena, retired paralegal, zero tolerance for nonsense, had been itching for an excuse to roast the HOA at the next meeting. I handed her a folder. Elena, I said, how do you feel about embezzlement? She smiled. I feel litigious. The HOA's next community meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m., and you better believe I marked that on my calendar like it was Christmas, New Year's, and Judgment Day all rolled into one. It was held at the community clubhouse, the same one Karen once tried to redecorate by removing all the art she deemed emotionally jarring, which apparently included anything painted after 1975 or containing more than 3 colors. I arrived 10 minutes early. Karen, of course, was already there, seated at the front like the tyrant queen of HOA land, sipping from her #1 neighborhood watchdog mug and pretending not to notice me. But her left eye twitched when she saw the folder in my hand. Elena arrived a few minutes later, looking like a courtroom just materialized around her. Black blazer, reading glasses, calm fury. She gave me a subtle nod, the kind you see lawyers give their client right before they obliterate the opposition. The meeting opened with Karen doing her usual power play. Let's begin with the agenda, she chirped. We have several pressing issues, including a resident who has been creating disruption through passive-aggressive landscaping and excessive lighting. She didn't name me, but her eyes did. I also want to remind everyone, she continued, that this HOA operates on mutual respect, order, and strict compliance with our bylaws. Without them, we have chaos. Funny you should bring up compliance, Elena said, standing casually. Karen froze. Elena opened her folder and began pulling out receipts. Literally, I've reviewed the past 2 years of financial disclosures, which, by law, you are required to submit to the community quarterly. Funny thing, though, There are a number of purchases that don't seem to benefit the association at large. She held up one slip. $2.43 for an espresso machine, labeled as meeting refreshments. But there's no record of it ever being brought to a meeting. Karen tried to speak, but Elena steamrolled right over her. Then there's this. Insulation for a shed. A shed that is, according to zoning maps, located solely on your private property. Labeled as HOA storage space, despite never being listed in prior asset declarations. People started murmuring. And then, Elena said, flipping one last page, we have multiple payments made to a landscaping service that appears to only maintain one lot. Lot 17. Everyone turned to look at Karen. Karen, who lived on Lot 17. I wish I could describe the exact shade of red her face turned, but I don't think Pantone has invented it yet. Somewhere between criminal embarrassment and violently overcooked shrimp. These were approved expenditures, she stammered. Elena arched an eyebrow. Approved by whom? Karen shuffled her papers like they might transform into a believable excuse. Steve, from the back, quietly raised his hand. I didn't know about any of this, he said. And I'm on the finance committee. That was the tipping point. The HOA president, an older gentleman named Ron who had mostly stayed silent for the past year while Karen steamrolled meetings, finally stood up and cleared his throat. I think we need to suspend Karen's authority until this can be reviewed by our legal counsel, he said. Effective immediately. Karen looked like someone had just canceled Christmas. This is a personal attack. This is harassment. No, I said, standing up slowly. That was cutting off someone's water during a heat wave without due process. This is just your own rules turning around to bite you. She turned to me, pure venom. You think this makes you the hero? I shrugged. Nope. I'm just the guy who finally read the damn manual. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, knocking over the complimentary cookie tray on her way to the door, which, in hindsight, felt very on brand. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, Karen woke up to an official city violation notice posted on her front door. The inspector had followed up on his previous visit and slapped her with unpermitted structure fines, improper surveillance installations, and, oh yes, a $500 fine for unauthorized modification of public utility equipment, namely, the water valve she'd shut off at my house. She tried to appeal it. Guess who handled the city liaison correspondence at the utility company? Hi. It me. I responded with a copy of her original complaint about my unauthorized hose activity, time-stamped and everything. Let's just say her case didn't exactly make it through review. But the icing on the cake? That came 2 days later. She lost her energy efficiency rebate. Turns out, during the audit request I triggered, her property failed the assessment. Her appliances weren't compliant. Her command center was a fire hazard. And the koi pond heater? It had been spiking usage into flagged territory for months. Her monthly bill went up by $212. Now, I'd love to say she came over and apologized, that she learned a lesson. But instead, she unplugged all her cameras, took down her HOA signs, and started parking 3 streets over, presumably to avoid everyone on the block who now knew what she'd been up to. That was fine with me, because peace returned to the neighborhood. Hydrangeas were watered. Gnomes stood tall, and every time I walked past her house and saw the porch light flicker, I smiled. They say revenge is best served cold, but honestly, mine came slightly warmed, like a perfectly toasted marshmallow, soft on the inside, scorched on the outside, and dangerously flammable when poked. After Karen's public humiliation, her little HOA empire crumbled faster than a gluten-free cookie in a toddler's fist. The next HOA meeting? She didn't show. Rumor had it she was taking time to rebalance her energy, which I assume meant screaming into a pillow while Steve quietly packed a bug-out bag labeled Cabin Escape Plan B. Diane, you remember her, Karen's sidekick and iPad warrior, tried to step up. She lasted exactly 9 minutes into the next board session before Elena handed her a 12-page petition calling for a full board re-election, signed by 72% of the neighborhood. By the end of the week, Karen was officially stripped of all HOA authority. No more clipboard, no more windbreaker, and, Most importantly, no more power trips. Well, not the kind she could get away with anyway. But here's the twist, the part most people don't see coming. After the dust settled, and Karen became a social cautionary tale like that one kid who licked a lamppost in winter, I got a knock on my door. It was Steve. He looked exhausted. Shirt rumpled. Eyes bloodshot. A man who'd seen too much and said too little for far too long. "Hey," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I stepped outside, wary. "Sure." He hesitated, then blurted, "Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About the water thing. About all of it. She went too far. I should have stopped her." I blinked. "That I didn't expect." "I get it," I said. "Tyrants don't usually come with off switches." He chuckled, and for a second, I could see the guy he might have been before HOA warfare hollowed him out. Then he added, "We're selling the house." That stopped me. "Seriously?" He nodded. "She needs a change. Something with fewer rules. Somewhere without a homeowners association." "You mean like prison?" He almost laughed at that. "Something like that." And just like that, Steve walked off, the weight of 4 garden gnomes and one extremely unhinged spouse seemingly lifted from his shoulders. Within 2 weeks, a for sale sign went up on Lot 17. And 3 weeks after that, they were gone. No goodbye party. No newsletter announcement. Just gone. The new owners? A retired couple from Oregon. Chill, friendly, and most importantly, anti-Karen. They immediately took down the motion cameras, replaced the mini command center with a hot tub, and asked if they could borrow my LED spotlight setup for their Halloween decorations. I liked them instantly. The HOA underwent a full revamp. Elena was voted in as president, unopposed. Our new rules: no surveillance unless requested by multiple households. Lawn freedom within reason. Yes, my hammock is finally legal. And a strict, no unauthorized utility shutoff policy. That last one, my suggestion, voted in unanimously. Oh, and remember the master water valve Karen abused? The utility company upgraded it with an individual remote locking system. You now need proper ID and dual authentication to touch it. I had them install the prototype on my property. Guess who has the override code? Yours truly. But the final cherry on top didn't come until months later. I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a clipboard, a half-used glitter gel pen, a sticky note that read, "Thought you might want this. I'm done playing Queen." K. No apology. No tears. Just resignation. And somehow, that was better than a courtroom confession. Because in the end, I didn't just win. I rewired the board. Literally and metaphorically. The sprinklers still run on a smart schedule. The lights still shine just bright enough to annoy any future Karens. And every time I walk past my upgraded utility box, I pat it like a loyal dog. Because when someone cuts off your water, you don't just get even. You get smarter, stronger, and just petty enough to make sure they never forget it. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.